My honor and privilege to introduce my close friend, colleague, mentor, Professor Chris Curtin, who's the Vice President for Innovation and Performance in the University, to welcome you on behalf of the university. Chris.
Thank you, Lokesh. I've come clean. I'm a complete fraud. And Lokesh is a very clever man, and he knows lots about mindfulness. And what's really involved here is the comparative method, because when you look at me, then you know what isn't mindfulness, and you know how to get on what matters, right? I'm glad of the opportunity, nonetheless, of my ignorance, to be able to talk to you here. It'll be one of my, hopefully, last public functions in the institution. You never know what waits you, but the end is nigh, in that sense of the term, or it's coming soon for me here. And take a bit longer than possibly I have been given, a small bit. I won't delay you too much, right? But there's a few things that I do want to say. Firstly, thanks for the invitation to address the conference, and welcome to you all who have come here to Galway, and many of my incredibly esteemed colleagues from across the university who are also present to participate in the day, right, okay? I hope that it will have a really big impact in our lives and in the lives of this university. I'm looking forward to the talks, the discussions, the debates, and I will do my very best to listen in the most mindful fashion possible. Interestingly, right, on the other hand, many of you saw the moon this morning when you were out for your early morning walk. Did you see it? It was really interesting, wasn't it, right? An incredible quarter moon and a crescent. And you did see the one single star above it, didn't you? You didn't? Oh, you weren't looking if you didn't see it, because there's only one single star up there. Of course, I didn't know what it was, but the man on the door told me it was Venus. Okay. I'd like to take a number of minutes with you to tell you also a bit about myself, not to be self-indulgent, but there's something I think to be learned in it, which will, as I say, something that will be hopefully relevant. And I want to set out what I see as some of the core challenges for the university and how these challenges might be addressed if we could adopt a more mindful approach. Like Lokesh, well, I'm not a proper scientist, he gets a white coat, I don't. But nonetheless, I have a semi-scientific mind, and I am also skeptical, so I use the word could. I say could because I am always hopeful, but of course we never really know what will happen when we set out on a journey, and that is, I'm afraid, the case, right? So we don't know. As I say, unlike Lokesh, and he is knowledgeable about mindfulness, and don't believe him when he tells you he isn't, and probably most of you here who have knowledge about it, I have no great expertise with regard to mindfulness. And I came clean with my esteemed colleague, Eilish Ward, who is a knowledgeable person about mindfulness, sitting here in the audience at about 8:15 this morning. So I feel much better. I have always been, though, a diligent student. Yeah, that is actually a fact. So I actually have read 3 books in the last 3 weeks on this particular topic. Right? You may say that you may say anything you like. 2 of them are by Thich Nhat Hanh. Thai Eilish tells me, so I get over the problem of pronunciation. And one of them is The Joy of Living. Right, okay? I'll make no further reference to these 2 particular books, except to tell you that I find the 3rd book, which is highly intellectual in ways, pretty easy, but the 2 books about practice next to impossible. For me to sit down and to concentrate on the porridge as it's going into my mind in the morning ain't going to work, right? Okay. The word journey appears a lot, okay? Lokesh has already mentioned it. I think I may have mentioned it exactly. Let me tell you one of 3 stories that I'll spin for you while I'm here this morning, right, okay? Exactly 30 years ago this month, right, I had my first sabbatical leave from what was then UCG. I had the absolute privilege to spend a year in the Netherlands, in what was then Wageningen Agricultural University. I was to be replaced as teacher in the then Department of Political Science and Sociology by a man known as Richard Quinney. Richard Quinney was, so we all thought, it was true, was a world-famous criminologist. He was. People who knew about him said he would be in the top 5 in the world, right, criminologist. And we were absolutely delighted to get him here. And he was to teach my course called The History of Sociological Thought. Now, there was no Google in those days, and you couldn't go in and look to see, had he ever written a paper in the past 5 years on any topic related to sociology or criminology. It turned out he hadn't. When Richard Quinney came to Galway, 30 years ago, he had lost all interest whatsoever in criminology and sociology, and he turned his mind to Zen Buddhism. Now, my course on the history of social thought is a pretty standard course, give or take, you would find in any sociology department in most places in the world. It's a sort of an overview of the great men, and they're all men, Marx, Durkheim and Weber, and what they might tell us about the origins of the modern world. There was one particular student in this course. His name is Tom. I won't tell you his real name. This man is alive today. Tom is his real name. He was on a full-time course doing it on a part-time basis. He was actually a guard up in Ballyshannon, and he came to the university down to Galway most days on a motorbike. Tom was ambitious, very, very ambitious, and rightly so. He wanted the gold standard exit from this place, the 1-1, and the job afterwards. The course in social thought bear no resemblance to what it should have been, and Tom knew this. He became increasingly frustrated at what was going on and found it impossible in his head to prepare for the exam. My colleague Michael Aver, a friend now working in New York University, told me the following event as it took place. After one of Richard's class on Zen Buddhism, which should have been probably about Durkheim, Tom Courtney proceeded up to my office, which was in Tower 1, which was then occupied by Richard Quinney. And when Quinney arrived at the door, Tom hopped out in front of him and in a totally frustrated and agitated fashion said to him, "Richard, this is a complete disaster. I have no idea what's going on. My life is in a mess." He was hoping for a bit of comfort, solace, and a way out. But Quinney's response was, "I will tell you, Tom, one thing. In life, it's not the destination that matters, it's the journey." This was not the response which Tom was expecting, and he went away dissatisfied. Now you may think there's a bad end to this story. And of course, one of the great problems we face here is one of cause and effect. But I will tell you that Tom did get the gold standard 1-1 and is now a senior partner in the country's biggest law firm. Reading about mindfulness not only confirmed my ignorance of the topic, but also brought back to me that there was much of mindfulness in my own background, in my own home, and in the surrounding world. And in fact, that was one of the things I was reflecting on it is that whilst the general principles of mindfulness, if I understand them at all, which I probably don't, are universal, there are usually interesting questions about how they would be applied to particular circumstances. In other words, the significance of mindfulness in context, and in this context, the university, the type of places that universities are, and the type of people that you find in universities. I grew up in North Clare. If you walk along the beach in Salthill, you can see it on the other side. In some ways, I always find it very strange, even today in the modern world, to go back down home and to see how different it all remains, even though it is such a short distance away. I was brought up in what was called curtains. That's how we were known as, curtains, plain and simple. There were lots of curtains, but somehow we were known as curtains. My family are historically bakers, and my grandfather came to the area in the late 1900s to establish a bakery and a grocery and a pub. By the time that I was born, or shortly before, the business had totally disintegrated. And my mother married in there in 1945, essentially to a life of incredibly hard work, facing day in, day out, the most horrible financial problems. And we did experience quite an amount of material poverty. Now, it's no big deal in Wales. Everybody that we knew were more or less materially poor, but we did appear. Now, I don't want you to feel too sorry for me, right? Okay, I've done pretty well since, right? And I don't want for very much, right? So, thank you. That's not the point of telling you this, right? I want to tell you the point of telling you, right? Yet, despite it all, despite the difficulties, my mother was generous, kind, completely non-judgmental, blamed nobody for her misfortune. Well, I'll tell you about one person she did. Made no distinctions whatsoever between people, recognized no one above her, and certainly recognized, more importantly, no one below her. Never said a bad word about anything or anybody, except from time to time my father. My father was as easygoing as my mother was energetic and enterprising. I've reflected a bit again on him because we didn't have any relationship at all, to be honest. The youngest of 16 children, well, to be totally accurate, the youngest of 16 children of a family of 18 children who were brought up in maybe an unusual or maybe not too unusual practice. It's where you have large families, whereby one by one as they were born, they were sent from Lisdoonvarna 4 miles down the road to the grandparents in Kilfenora to be reared. Right? And that was our time. By the time that I was born, well, my father probably had seen it all, or he thought he had seen it all, or maybe he didn't think it was worth it. But he also had a strange version of mindfulness, as I understand it, right? But an imperfect one. He had a capacity to let all thoughts into his head, but he had an equal capacity to let all thoughts out the other end, right? In other words, right, he didn't see the point in holding on to any of it, right? Okay? And he developed this incredibly phrase in his sort of a mindful way. When asked to do anything, he would say, "It will all be done by and by." A phrase that I have never heard in recent times. It was not my mother's favorite phrase. I was incredibly fortunate to have such a supportive mother, as I say, unjudgmental, who allowed me to get on with whatever it is that I wanted to do. I was also incredibly fortunate that I was the good luck to meet a lot of caring women who were dressed in black, i.e. nuns. The Mercy nuns, who had a well-established outpost in Innistimon, 7 miles away, and our rivals in football and basketball terms, right? As part of what I would call their civilizing mission, decided to open an outpost in Lisdoonvarna. I was equally fortunate to benefit from those who cared enough to establish free education and to put in place scholarships. I would never have been in university but for those people. In 1968, age 16, technically illegal, you should have been 17 to come to university, along with 2 of my best friends, we arrived in what was then UCG. None of us had any family members of any connection whatsoever who had ever gone to university, ever, I stress. We knew nothing about this place or anything university, and we knew nobody whatsoever who ever went to university. I never spoke once to my parents about what I was doing in university. They hadn't a clue. And they never asked me any questions whatsoever. It was a wonderful place then, in my eyes, and I have benefited all my life from the fine people that I have met here. Out of it, I have become, from their endeavours, an incredibly privileged position, up to the position of professor, where I hope that I have had positive influence on the lives of thousands of students and many, many colleagues. I have been fortunate to meet some fantastic people here, people who have been willing to give their lives in many ways for the good of this institution. In particular, I single out one who is here present today, Tom Boylan, who has years and years after his retirement come back and back again to do his very best to help us to do even better here. In The Joy of Living, I hope I get the pronunciations right, Jungi Mingur, this is the book, The Joy of Living. It's really good, actually. I really like it. Yeah? Advises that we should reflect long and carefully and then set down what we feel is really important to us. I did this exercise, and in doing it, I established that I have an emotional attachment to this university. It ain't just any place. It isn't just a place of work. I am really attached to this institution. I thought long and hard. I really want to see it do well, and not just to be good, but to be great. To do so, I think, it has to focus on core values, to think more about it, not to say this is all airy-fairy stuff, it's much more than that, about leadership. It has to do an awful lot about how we relate to each other, about being honest and being more open in our communications. And it also has to do, for those of us who have privileged permanent employment, to begin to think a bit more about the long-term consequences and a longer time view. I also reflected a bit about how people prioritize things and what's really important in their life and what do we really know about people. I digress for a second story for you. Right? I had a distant cousin down in West Clare, his name is Sean, who lived in Spanish Point, which is an incredibly beautiful place right down in West Clare. He lived in a state, some of you who are familiar to the world of the rural environment, called he never married. He had a small farm, which was neat, and in Clare we would call it in our biggest broad accents, tasty. If you went to him, you will never be able to do it, but if you went to him to answer Jungi Mingur's question, what is really important in your life, Sean? He was a good farmer. He loved his animals. He was not cruel to them, but he really loved traditional Irish music. He played the fiddle, and in the early years of the Willie Clancy Summer School, he endeavoured to have all the essential farmer's tasks, all the work that were really important on the farm, including saving the hay, absolutely finished in time so he could focus on the big event, the Willie Clancy Summer School. Taking the music so seriously, he did what would be very, very strange and unusual for a person like him. He booked himself in for the week to a nearby B&B 2 miles away in Milltown Malbay, and proceeded to play music in the morning, in the evening, and at night time. On the Monday, he proceeded as planned. On the Tuesday, he proceeded as planned. On the Wednesday, he proceeded as planned. But on Wednesday evening, playing in Hennessy's pub at about 9:30, through the corner of his eye, he saw one of his neighbours, looking in an incredibly agitated state. He finished out the set of tunes, and then the neighbour approached him. And in an agitated fashion, he said, "Sean, there's bad news." So Sean looked at him and he said, "What is it?" "The cows have broken into the hay." The neighbour expected Sean to become equally agitated, to jump up and say, "We're off, we'll sort them out, we'll bring them in." But he was met by the response, "They'll regret that in spring." He went back, played out the evening, but I did say he was a diligent and tasty farmer. He cut the musical venture short on Thursday and returned to the thieving cows. In my view, and it is only mine, in my view, NUIG has made great strides in recent years, particularly over the past 5 or 10. I know that the university rankings are deficient. I accept that they are comparatively deficient in many ways. But we have done well, and I would like to think that we should be a bit proud about it. We aspire to be a top university. This is a goal which I think is achievable. And we will have, however, to identify core values and change and reflect on how we do the things we do. We need to be more open with each other, and we need to talk. We are special, we are unique, but we also, and this is something that we have to realise, and I think Lokesh hinted it at the start, we do not live in an isolated environment. The world is in and all around us, and it does impact on what we do. I have the strange title called Vice President for Innovation and Performance. I didn't invent this title, I have to say. Sean O'Driscoll is up in the corner. He did, and it's his fault. And my job is to help to improve the performance of the university. Let's be totally honest, right? There's nothing unusual about this attempt, right? It goes on everywhere, all over the world. And to be honest about it, right, many attempts to bring about the types of improvements that people want have led to shockingly brutal processes, which rightly have been defined as the worst forms of managerialism. It is true, right? I asked a colleague of mine to act as an external examiner for a PhD. He works in a university, well, he doesn't now, he did work in the university in Australia, and he said he'd do it, but he said, Chris, the university here has been totally brutalised, and lots of people have gone, and it's not what I think a university should be. So let's be totally honest here, right? In trying to bring about change, you can do terrible things, right, okay? But honestly, I don't think you have to. I don't think you have to do what everybody else does elsewhere, even in the so-called English-speaking world. And I think that we can improve our performance in a much more compassionate way. Here, I think leadership and long-term commitment to excellence are critical. We have now wonderful buildings in a wonderful campus in NUIG. But NUIG's future is not dependent on these buildings. God, they're so much better than the ones when I came through. But hell, you got nothing to say. You have nothing to say in a good building or a bad building. It is the truth, right? Let's be honest here. Okay. So, it's not dependent on these buildings, but it's dependent on people, its students and its staff, administrative and academic. We are particularly dependent on people who have given positions of senior responsibility, that they recognise that they have this responsibility to lead, and in so doing provide an environment where there are opportunities for all students and staff to flourish. In other words, that they would be caring of all staff in the institution. A mindful university, to my view, has leaders that have wisdom, that are not only academically smart, but also have high moral and emotional levels of development. Leaders need to be committed to the core values, at least the ones that are important to me, of fairness, excellence, hard work, and critically, treating everybody with respect. We have a real problem, a real challenge in getting people to come forward to leadership positions in this university. It is true, we have, yeah. We need to work harder on this particular topic of leadership, and I think today is a really big day. There are lots of things that need to be looked at on this whole question of leadership and the relationship between leaders and others. We have assumed that because people are technically good at what they do from an academic point of view, that they could also be good in leading other people. This, in general, I'm afraid, is false. It isn't true at all. Many people are fearful of working with others. And this is actually the topic of this book, fear. We don't honestly face up. We don't talk to others about the fears that we have in trying to talk to other people. Rather, we ignore it, pretend that it isn't there. I also think that we should talk a bit more about what leadership ought to be in a university environment. And for me, it is about enabling. I think also that we should address the question of fear of failure and the habits that have come into our heads about inferiority because perhaps we work in a provincial university and that somehow or other you cannot be really good unless you are at the centre in the metropolis, which of course is a historical tradition in literature. There is a very interesting distinction which is known to all students of political science, which is made by one of the leading theorists, Stephen Lukes. He has a third distinction, but he makes two very important distinctions as those between what he calls power over and power to. We all know what power over is. If you ever grew up in rural areas or even in towns, the priest was very much a figure of power over, right? The great person, the person in charge, right? Okay? I really don't particularly like power over, to be honest. I don't like it because it has the conjectures up the notion of domination, which I absolutely abhor. But Lukes has another dimension to power, a second one, which is power to. This is the concept whereby you use power to enable other people to realize their full potential. My commitment has always been, I hope I have displayed it in my behaviour, but that's for others to judge, to the concept of power to, which is the idea that somehow or other, in holding position of responsibility, I am helping others to get on with a happy and better life. One question that I would leave at on this other end of it is, the university is currently not integrated in its thinking about what it should be about and how it should approach. The university is broken into parts, and there is need for a communication, and we need to find ways in which this can be done. A very interesting emphasis in the literature that I have read in mindfulness is that it draws our attention to the long term. We should be preoccupied with the day-to-day, but we should also be concerned with the longer term. Wisdom, in my view, therefore, in university leadership is also the ability to understand the long-term consequences of today's decisions and behaviours. Now, I tell you, this is not an original, but some of you who are as old as I am will pick it up. Now, I'm not the world's most religious guy. Who am I copying here? The young people won't know who it is. Well, actually, it's Ray Davis and the Kinks. Aha, Lola. 45 years ago, Ray Davis was on the go with Lola when he used the phrase, "No, I'm not the world's most physical guy." Now, I'm not the world's most religious guy. I like his way of putting it, right? But I go through these phases of visiting churches. Yeah? One of my phases was when I had my sabbatical in Holland, and I went to these Calvinist churches. I was located within the black stocking area, right, strict Calvinism, and I went to them, right, and I was absolutely mesmerized by the portrayal of evil and hell. It was absolutely compelling. The art, that is, the pictures, were absolutely compelling in its ferocity, and it certainly would encourage you to avoid going down, at least while you were looking at them, right? Of course, when you went back out, you went at it again, but that was a different matter. In the last 2 weeks, I was in Bristol University, and being mindful, I took time out. Well, this is true. I normally wouldn't. I used to go to conferences on a regular basis, and I used to sit in at every paper, and no matter how bad I thought it was, I'd stay, right, yeah. And I thought, this time, no, do your bit, and then go out. So I went out for a walk, and I said, okay, I'll see Bristol. I started walking down the road, and the next thing I saw this church. It's St. Mary's Redcliffe. Most of you probably haven't heard of it, but maybe there are church historians here, right? It's a parish church, but it's no ordinary parish church, truthfully. It's probably the biggest parish church in England. I think it's not a church originally for ordinary folk, as we say. And it was constructed somewhere between the 12th and the 15th century. And it's a wonderful example of Gothic architecture, and it's a Grade 1 listed building. I entered
St. Mary's by chance, because I had no intention of going it. I saw it, I walked in, and I stayed for 3 hours. And I know I don't meet your high standards, I admit, but I thought I was pretty mindful. Yeah, I felt good. I reflected, I sat, my head did spin from time to time. I did walk around a lot, but I did sat down, right? And I want to tell you about a few things that I saw and why I think they're useful. The first thing I noticed, but there's nothing, you all know this to be true, but sometimes it's good to be reminded how young it was that people died, generally, because lots of people use the church for tombs. So when you walk around, you're walking over these people, and they have lots of monuments and things up about themselves on the walls of the church. But still, it was amazing. 35, 32, 45, 44. God, I'm a lot more than that, right? I know everyone that I know is a lot more than that, and they all look not too bad at all. More seriously, because, you know, children are so important to us all, the numbers of children that are remembered in memorials. Under 5, under 4, under 3, under 2. And in one wall, one memorial written on behalf of her 5 children by their afflicted mother, none of them living beyond the age of 5. And then I thought how it was that the commitment to excellence by scientists and medical people over the years, in universities and of course outside, but often within universities, had done so much to alter the prospects of life for those of us who came into the world much later. The spire on St. Mary's Church is absolutely a wonder. Yeah? It is phenomenally beautiful. It's spectacular. And it has leather tiles. Yeah. Never saw them before. And on the day, interestingly, they were being repaired by totally skilled craftsmen, and it was terrifying to see them at work. Right? I had to stop looking up. Right? The church was built over a long period of time, but there was a dramatic storm which damaged the spire in the 1400s. And the repair work took place over 30 years. An ordinary individual called William Worcester often visited the church. No particular expertise in architecture whatsoever, visited the church. And in the course of his visits, he wrote a long and detailed account of the repair process. Such was the quality of his work that the Victorian architect, George Godwin, used his description to repair the church 400 years later. The impact of the commitment to excellence in that sense of the term. I come to a conclusion. The most attractive feature of mindfulness for me is its emphasis, if I understand it correctly, on meeting challenges with composure, but also with a sense of humour. If there is anything I miss about the old days in the university, it is the wit of my fellow academics. Everything has become incredibly serious, right? And we are shockingly businesslike. And those who know me and at university management teams meetings, I do make an odd joke and I do feel a bit foolish. In the words of Yonggi Mingur, every aspect of experience assumes a certain brightness when you learn to laugh at yourself. Now, I'm incredibly preoccupied with strategy and vision, talking about vision and planning and torturing people and staff and everything about visions. Where's your plan and where's your operational plan and all these things, right? So I'd like to have a right good crack at myself now, right, yeah? And I'll finish by this and a short quotation for you. This is a story from business, and Sean probably has heard it from a different angle, but I'm going to tell it about a Vice President for Innovation and Performance. The Vice President for Innovation and Performance is appointed to his job. He's incredibly worried that he won't do well and that life will be bad and that all things will go badly. So he talks to his predecessor, and he says, can you give me a hand here? I'm in big trouble. I really don't know how to do this job. And it's true, I didn't know how to do the job, and I did talk to Tom Boylan and try to advise me. I did my best, Tom. Right. Anyway, his successor says, I will indeed help you, he said. And he went away and he came back with 3 envelopes, marked 1, 2, and 3. All went well for the Vice President for about 2 years, and then the Minister for Education decided to withdraw some finances. Things went very badly, and his colleague looks askance at this Vice President for Innovation and Performance. So he decided to open envelope 1 and take the advice. It read, blame your successor. 2 more years rolled on, everything went even better again, and then all of a sudden, things went badly. Something else happened in the university. He said, the second brown envelope. He went in, opened it up. Blame it on the environment and the government. He went back. 3 more years were great, and then the university sank in the rankings. He thought, this is not good, but there's always the third brown envelope. Back he went, opened up the third envelope to find the advice, prepare 3 brown envelopes. To conclude, I think we should recognize the value of the university and what we have in a better way, and hopefully this mindfulness approach will do it for us. Its students and its staff are absolutely wonderful, and we are obliged, all of us, to help to unlock potential, to achieve excellence, if we can, to avoid suffering, if we can, and to spread mindfulness. I did get to the last chapter of this book. You'll say I'm cheating. Maybe I just jumped to the last chapter, in fact, but I didn't. I'd like to finish with the first paragraph of The Joy of Living by Yonggi Mingyur Rinpoche, which Eilish tells me doesn't mean PhD, means expertise, I think. Does that right, Eilish? Yeah? Expertise in the field. Among all living creatures studied thus far by modern scientists, only human beings, can it be said, with absolute certainty, have been endowed with the ability to make deliberate choices about the direction of their lives and to discern whether these choices will lead them through the valley of transitory happiness or into a realm of lasting peace and well-being. Though we may be genetically wired for temporary happiness, we have also been gifted with the ability to recognize within ourselves a more profound and lasting sense of confidence, peace, and well-being. Amongst sentient beings, human beings appear to stand alone in their ability to recognize the necessity to forge a bond between reason, emotion, and the instinct to survive, and to do so, and in so doing, create a universe, not only for ourselves and the human generations that follows, but also for all creatures who feel pain, fear, and suffering, in which we are all able to coexist contentedly and peacefully. Thank you.